So hello everyone and welcome to this free webinar on the importance of sleep. Some of you I haven't met before, so I'm Melanie Green and I'm an occupational psychologist and I work as a coach and trainer and workplace mediator. I've been running my own business for over 30 years and I specialize in two main areas. One is around your personal resilience in work and in life. And so how you manage the pressures, how you change from the inside out. And the other is about how you have constructive working relationships with other people. So I work in all different types of business. And one of my kind of driving values is about practicing what I preach. So 2 people, trouble falling asleep. So others can fall asleep. 3, fitful, intermittent sleep, 1 awake in the night for hours, and then also 1 person, you appear to sleep well, but you're feeling exhausted. And so actually, whatever your issues are, is that my hope is that I've constructed a webinar that's going to be able to hit whatever your sleep issues are. So what we're going to cover today is why is sleep important and what stops us from sleeping, and then how to improve your sleep. Now, there's a lot of information out there about kind of the physical side of things in terms of they call it sleep hygiene and light and darkness and all of that sort of thing and comfort levels. But as an occupational psychologist, we're going to look at actually the emotional and the psychological side of things. And there is a great book, and I will email people afterwards with links to the various books, but I always recommend Dr. Guy Meadows' The Sleep Book, and he also runs one-day workshops as well. But looking at, and he talks about similar things, but also some of the practical side of things. And I'd like this to be as practical as possible. So think as you go through maybe one action that you can take in the next 24 hours that's going to start you on that path to getting better sleep. So I wanted to say, oh yes, just in case people leave before I finish, is sometimes people might need to leave early. I just want to say there is kind of other support available. I offer a free coaching audit to individuals where you complete a questionnaire, you have a free 30-minute coaching session with me. I've got another 8-week online course that's starting on Monday, the 18th of October, Being and Doing, an 8-week program. All the information is under the free resources and shop on the website. And I've also got a manager's development program starting November, but there's free resources as well. So if you're not already registered with my website, you'll receive Melanie's Monday Motivational Messages and my Inspire newsletter and news of other webinars as I do them frequently throughout the year. So what I wanted to say before we kind of dive into the content is that, first of all, is that everybody here is different. Is that there isn't one right approach. So you'll be different personalities. Some of you might be morning people like myself. You might be night owls. Is that you won't have different work situations. You might have different situations in your home in terms of your family. So it's about finding what is right for you. And what I would say is, if you're suffering from chronic insomnia for a long period of time, then please do seek medical advice. It's important that you do that. And also that I'm an occupational psychologist. I'm not kind of medically trained, but I'm basing this webinar on, first of all, my own experiences. And I have slept badly, but it is in the latter years, and there was lots of reasons for that. Then there were health issues, and it's in the last few years when I've really been putting into practice some of the things around getting a good night's sleep, and that has been starting to change. And it's also based on my clients' experiences as well. And experiment is that you might kind of, not everything's going to appeal to you, but experiment and over a period of time and see what works for you. So first of all, thinking about why sleep is important. I don't want to kind of freak you out. And I certainly know, and there's one person who's on here who kind of said to me, she was attending a pilot program that I was running over this summer. And she was saying that when she had a period of insomnia, hearing about, oh, sleep's bad for this and bad for that in terms of your health, actually just made it worse. And that's not, I don't want to do that. Why I'm kind of saying about the benefits of sleep and why sleep is important is that you are then kind of motivated to take the action to actually help you to sleep, rather than thinking, well, I don't have time to do that, Melanie, and somehow bearing the not sleeping. So the NHS website is, so that's in the UK, the National Health Service website, says that sleep can boost your immunity. It also says you can slim you. And I think rather than like the alternative is that actually, if we don't sleep well, there can be a tendency to eat terrible things, bad things during the day to keep us going. So we end up putting on weight. It boosting our mental well-being. There's a reason why that, sleep deprivation is used as a form of torture. Because really, if we're not sleeping, in terms of us mentally, emotionally, it really does affect our well-being. But they also talk about it preventing diabetes, but also increasing your sex drive. And it made me laugh when I read that. And I was kind of thinking, well, yeah, if you're exhausted, you're probably not going to be very interested. But also warding off heart disease. And but what I think is important is for you to think why getting a good night's sleep would be important, because you need to be convinced and motivated enough of the benefits in order to take the action. So you might kind of want to put in the chat boxes about actually what would be the benefits to you? What would be the benefits to your family or your friends or the people around you or your colleagues, or if you're a manager, to your staff? So, feel free to share the benefits in the chat box. I'm not going to go read this because I will send you a copy of the PowerPoint afterwards. But, there's lots of research that actually makes us more accident prone. And certainly when we're driving, but, even kind of around the house, I certainly know if I'm lacking in sleep, it will have that effect. So I think it's not just about the quantity of sleep. It's also about the quality of the sleep that you have that is so important. And I went to a webinar run by Andrew Sharman, and I've got a couple of his books, and again, I will do some links to them. Somebody was saying about the benefits. So thank you, Vanessa, saying more energy, less irritable with the family and with others. And then you can kind of say, well, if I'm less irritable, what else will it do? Somebody else saying about I'm in the menopause, and even though I sleep, the quality of my sleep is up and down. And actually, I just mentioned the menopause in the next slide as one of the potential kind of blocks to sleeping well. But let's just talk about the kind of quality of sleep. Is that so when I went to this webinar, they were talking about the fact that most of us know we kind of sleep in 90-minute cycles. But they were saying that when you actually get into a good night's sleep and a good, healthy sleep routine, what happens is that each 90-minute takes you deeper and deeper into sleep. And that when you're in that deepest part of sleep, it's a sort of sleep that if somebody shook you, you wouldn't wake up. And what is happening there is that there are lots of hormonal and chemical reactions that are happening in your body and your brain. That is where your body and your brain is repairing some of the damage that has been done during the day. And then gradually you go through more 90-minute cycles and you start to come out, and then you wake up. And what I realized when I listened to this is when I was getting what I thought was a good night's sleep, it appeared that I was sleeping for 7 or 8 hours, but I might be getting, waking. I was aware I was waking up, but I was still exhausted, was because I wasn't having this really deep sleep. and it's interesting. One of the changes that I made was that I heard, and in the UK there is a radio station called Radio 4, BBC Radio 4, and one of the programmes with I forgot, Michael Mosley, and it's called Just One Thing, and they're little 15-minute programs, and one of them was about sleep, and he said if one thing that you can do is to go for a brisk walk within 2 hours of waking up, and it only has to be a short walk. I do a kind of longer walk, and he said that resets your clock, and when I've been doing that, that has had a profound impact on this quality of sleep that I'm getting. Is that suddenly that I would be waking up when I'd had a good night's sleep with feeling so much better. So that's just kind of one thing outside of what I was going to kind of talk about. So let's look at and I'm going to do another poll here. So where's the other poll? Causes poor sleep. So let's just launch this poll as I talk. So again, it's a forced choice. Is asking you to choose just one. As that, is it physical? So is there some sort of illness? It could be medication that's interrupting your sleep, aches and pains, the menopause. Is it environmental? So, a lot of this might be about noise. So young baby, elderly parents, snoring, other people snoring, that it could be, things like that, or it could be in terms of, I've kind of put alcohol and caffeine because they're kind of things in our environment that we then take into us and then just can disrupt our sleep. Or is it the emotional worries? It might be worries, anxiety, it might be anger, frustration, irritation, whatever else it might be. It might be irritation with your partner snoring that is keeping you awake. But is it the emotional side? So I've had 6 out of 8 people who have done the poll so far. Let's share the results. So we've got 86% of people saying, actually, it's my emotional side. One person saying it's physical, and I'm guessing that might be the person who also mentioned the menopause earlier on, is that, and there can be a double kind of bind here, in that we might have something that's physical or environmental, but then also we kind of get anxious about, it's going to happen again tonight. And then that makes the situation worse, or we get angry about it or frustrated. And so it makes the situation worse. So I'm glad that most people kind of said, actually, it's the emotional side, because that's what I'm going to focus on here. But even the person who said, well, it's, the physical side is, I think, looking at some of the emotional stuff can help us deal with the physical things as well. And hopefully that will become clear as we go through. So what we're looking at, the emotional and a neurological sort of side of things. So I want to talk about you and your brain and sleep. Is that our brain is designed to keep us safe. So it's this similar brain that we had when we were cavemen and cavewomen. And so what it does is it looks out for, one, rewards, because those are positive things that we want to go towards, but also it's looking out for risks and threats. And so it needs to be able to know at night that actually I can switch off in order to be able to sleep, fall asleep, then stay asleep. And if I wake up, if you're a person of a certain age like myself, I will get up and go to the loo. But, if actually everything's calm, I'll just go back to sleep and back into a deep sleep quickly. So in terms of this, is the brain does need to know that it's safe to sleep. And therefore, a busy brain during the day find it hard to switch off. Now, if you're busy and you're really enjoying it and you're thriving, and I'll talk a little bit more about that with the next slide, then your brain actually, it's not worrying, so it can switch off at night. But when there are concerns that you haven't dealt with during the working hours, or the waking hours, I should say, as well as the working hours, then it's likely to start to interfere with your brain. and your brain's ability to switch off and your ability to sleep. So I use this model, and some people who've been on my workshops and my webinars before have seen this model, is that it's when we're in the zone of optimal performance, we're more likely to get good quality sleep. And in this model, and I often use it about demonstrating the difference between pressure and stress, is if you've got low demands on yourself, you can end up understimulated, bored, and demotivated, and you may find yourself sleeping a lot. So I had a dear friend who in the first lockdown, they were retired, they were living in a new place, in a new town, and they actually slept a lot. I was very worried about them, but they slept a lot. And so often we will sleep here, but often, again, waking up but not feeling refreshed. Whereas when we have the right levels of pressure and demands, that includes what's going on up here, and we're feeling calm about what we've got in our plate, we're in that zone of optimal performance. We're feeling energized, we're challenged, and we're stretched but not strained, and we're feeling fulfilled. And at the end of the day and the end of the working week is that we feel calm, we feel content, we kind of still got energy. And it's not driven by the energy of adrenaline. So it's in a much kind of calmer state. Whereas once we've got the demands and pressures increase too much, and that can be us putting on demands on ourselves. I can't tell you how many coaching clients, actually a lot of the demands are coming from here. And I'm often asked to coach people who actually are performing really well, but they're suffering from the tyranny of perfectionism, and and driven by that and by their inner critic. And for those of you not aware, wrote a book about mastering your inner critic, release your inner wisdom. And I'll talk more about that later on. So what I'd like to do, any questions, feel free to ask any questions about this model. But what I'd like to do is run just another very quick poll, is the final poll about where you are right now. So again, it's a forced choice. So are you in the understimulated, in the zone of optimal performance, or in the overburdened, stressed out about the threat response? So here are the results. So only one person feeling in that understimulated, bored. And actually you can be very busy, but you could do whatever it is in the sleep. So it doesn't mean necessarily that you're not busy. Great, the 3 are in the zone of optimal performance. That's really, really great. And and we got 3 people also then in that overburdened threat response. I'll talk more about that in a moment, and feeling quite stressed about it. So feel free to ask questions in the chat box at any point about any of these models, but hopefully they all kind of make sense. So what we kind of look at is how do you get in and stay in the zone of optimal performance? And one thing is to understand about the brain's threat response is that the brain's threat response is designed, when we were cavemen and cave women, it was that fight, flight, or sometimes freeze, or what's often added into the mix, the idea of flock. And the freeze is when we were cavemen and cave women, if a saber-toothed tiger was chasing after everyone, everyone was running, as often they wouldn't notice you if you froze, it'd be a tree. But sometimes we can do that when we're kind of feeling the threat response goes in, but also the flocking. And this often happens in businesses and organizations where people are unhappy and they flock together. And if they flock together for support and then encouragement, and then somebody says, what are we going to do about that? That would be great. But too often flocking actually involves people coming together, moaning a lot, and kind of winding each other up and making it worse. And actually can be making the threat response worse. And so lots of things happen when we're into threat response. The amygdala is triggered, there's an adrenaline rush, the stress hormone cortisol is released. Is we often get into very tunnel visioned, And so we're talking about here is about if you're in threat response during the day, then it's going to be hard to calm down and sleep at night. So we're looking at how do you manage your threat response in the day and the negative effect on the threat response in your working day. And I'll also talk about how to dampen it down and how to manage it. So one of the things with a threat response, because it was designed to either run like mad or stay and fight, and if we survive, then the threat response disappeared, is we get into tunnel vision. It also decreases our work in memory because stress hormone cortisol affects the part of our brain that stores information and where we retrieve it, the hippocampus. And it sucks up cortisol, and that affects our ability to remember things and to achieve information. Dopamine levels go down, so we become more pessimistic, etc. And so that threat response means we are not as effective during the day. And also, if we're facing kind of major challenges in our life, it's much harder to think kind of clearly, logically, or creatively about those things. If I go on to my next slide, is that I go around with this old-fashioned room thermometer to talk about emotional temperature. So if we're in the zone of optimal performance, in all likelihood, our emotional temperature will be quite calm, quite low. We might have positive, I'm talking about negative emotions rather than positive, is that so if something triggers our threat response, we'll have a small blip, but we can then dampen down our threat response. If we're allowing our emotional temperature to go up day by day, is that if something triggers us, then we're going to go off the scale, and it's a lot harder to dampen things down. It's also then a lot harder if we're up here to then expect ourselves to, either fall asleep, or you might fall asleep because you're exhausted, but then do the usual 3 o'clock wake up and then can't get back to sleep, or you have very disturbed sleep. So think about what is it that increases the threat, your emotional temperature, and what is it that you can do that decreases it. So one of the things, and feel free to share in the chat box if you want to, but one of the things for me was that I was walking every day since last October. I now do daily walks at any rate, but I started this morning daily walk, and I'm very fortunate that I live kind of 5 minutes walk from a canal, so I can go north or south along the canal, or I can go across fields. And so it's not just the walk and the effect on sleep, but actually it sets me up for the day. And just because I see wildlife and I love being out in nature and seeing the changes of scenery. The first day I did it, it was in a blizzard, but I still did it. This morning, it was absolutely pouring down with rain, but I still enjoyed it. There was something kind of invigorating. I had my umbrella up, and it sets me up for the day. So in terms of my emotional temperature, it really does help me to set me up. And I've got a lot going on outside of work. Very sick mum, also she's got dementia. Lots of things been going on, but it helps to set me up for the right day, for the day ahead. So think about what is it that increases that you might want to can I eliminate? There may be many things. We have big things that we can't escape from. And therefore, what can you do to decrease your emotional temperature and help to boost you? So once you do that, it's a lot easier when something triggers your threat response to be able to respond to it and to dampen it down. So here are some ways to dampen down your brain's threat response. As I said, it's a lot easier if you're down here and you've had a little blip than if you've gone off the rails. It will be harder, but it doesn't mean that you can't use these techniques. You wouldn't use all of them. So one, it might be about coming into the here and now. Is that rather than the stories in our heads, which might be, I can't believe that that's happened, or why has that happened, or I'm really worried about whatever it is come into the here and now. One of great exercise that I read in a magazine somewhere was the 5-4-3-2-1 exercise. So I describe as, first of all, is to name 5 colors that you can around you, name 4 sounds, 3 things that you can physically feel. So I would say your bottom on your seat, or your feet on the floor, or your clothes, rather than emotionally. And then 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And even doing this 5-4-3, often people are right into the here and now. And people who suffer from a lot of anxiety, is a great exercise, and people have found that incredibly useful. And sometimes through the day to do the 3-4-2-1 exercise to keep on dampening down their anxiety and their emotional temperature. Taking a deep breath before we respond helps to calm that adrenaline rush. Sometimes changing our posture. So we might have tensed up, or maybe we slumped down in kind of despair, kind of head in hands. So sometimes kind of changing posture, changing how we're sitting, can actually start to help us to, I talked about stepping into the adult self. Excuse me. Looking up briefly is that we access a different part of our brain when we look up. So it tends to be that when we're feeling kind of, oh, you know, that head in our head in our hands kind of syndrome, is that we're engaging in negative self-talk. So when you look up roughly where the wall meets the ceiling, you access your visual cortex. It's a lot easier then to, 1, visualize the future. So if you're thinking, how am I going to cope with a week ahead? Look up, visualize. I can send you a handout about visualizing success. It's visualize how you're going to handle everything that's on your plate, and how you're going to do it and thrive as well. And because I'm all about how do people thrive rather than merely survive. That's for me is true resilience. Also stepping into your adult self rather than kind of your fearful self. And if possible, removing yourself from the situation. And so using those techniques in the moment, but also if you're finding you're very anxious or experiencing negative emotions through the day, then being able to tap into those and use these techniques to reduce your emotional temperature can really help you to be much calmer through the day, which means you have a better chance of sleeping well at night. So, any questions, feel free, or any comments, feel free to make. What I wanted to do is share another model that I think is really helpful, particularly when you've got a lot on your plate. And it's from good old Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's one of the models that I use time and again in organizations because people find it so useful. So your circle of concern, so there will be lots of things in your circle of concern that impact on you, but that you have absolutely no control over. So, so we are going through a pandemic. We're still going through it. Is that that you know we can do things to protect ourselves. That's within our circle of influence. But the fact is, if you live in the UK, we've gone through Brexit as well. That's having an impact. If you're working in business, I'm working with a couple of people working procurement in an engineering manufacturing business. And it's a nightmare at the moment because so many supplies, because of the pandemic, because so much closed down. And so, you know, steel wasn't being made, loads of other things weren't being made. So supplies is really difficult. We're also here in the UK, we're having a major transport issues. The supplies are, even if they're there, they can't get to the companies. So those are things in your circle of concern. Is that, you know, they might have, like me, I have a mother who's got triple dementia. That's a fact. Can't change that fact. Can get lots of help, but there's not anything that we can change about it. But it has an impact on us. And when we spend a lot of time focusing on those things that are in our circle of concern, where we can't influence, we'll either end up very anxious or are very demotivated or very angry and frustrated. is that, it's like banging your head against a brick wall. Whereas when we come into our circle of influence, and it starts with our thoughts and beliefs, it's about, your moods and how your thoughts and beliefs affect your moods and emotions, then your behavior and your actions and how you communicate with others. Is that when we focus on that, then we feel empowered, then we feel more positive. Even if we're in dire situations, we feel like there is something we can do, and also then it dampens down our threat response because we're focusing on what we can do rather than what we can't do. So I don't know, please do share in the chat box whether you've seen this model before. Just let me know, yes or no, whether you've seen the model. And it's incredibly useful. And sometimes with myself, I have to come back to this model and remind myself about what's in your control, and what you can influence. And when you can do that, and so some people have seen it, so great. And so I think even if you have, it's often worth being reminded of, because sometimes we can forget this. And that when you focus on your circle of influence, then whether you're communicating in the workplace, you'll be in a much more centered place to have adult to adult conversations. And if you have to have difficult conversations, that's going to help. But also outside of work, I cannot tell you how many medical practitioners, I have to say, I thank that I live in the UK and for the NHS, is that in the last 2 weeks, and actually being able to, sometimes in quite a stressed state, things really in a bad situation with my mum's physical and mental health, is being able to actually calm down and get my thoughts collected so that I can then have an adult to adult, explain the situation and how dire sometimes it's been, but in a very calm way that actually gets them listening to you. So somebody saying, I like this model, I have seen it, and it's a good reminder. And I think, it really is. And people saying they regularly use it to think more positively and consider what you can and can't influence. I think it really is. It's so simple. And I think particularly when I'm working in organizations, because there's so much bureaucracy that can go with an organization that can drive you insane. And if you're not the people who are making the decisions about it, then come into your circle of influence. Well, it's within their circle of influence. So I want to go on. I'm keeping an eye on the time. And I want to talk about an exercise that comes from my book. So my book about mastering your inner critic, releasing your inner wisdom. You can get copies from me. And it's one of the exercises, many different exercises in there that really had a profound impact on rewiring my brain. When the book came out in 2008, and I hadn't learned all the things about neuroscience. And one of the things that we've now learned is that actually we can rewire our brains and we can radically change. And this was one of the exercises that really did have an impact on. So I had a very strong inner critic and a very fearful child, which you can imagine caused a lot of anxiety and stress during the day, but also greatly disrupted my sleep. And so we can, by using simple exercises, so rather than the inner critic always going and the fearful child always going, is actually there's this new neural pathways of that inner wisdom that I can tap into at any time. So in terms of sleep, is that your fearful child might have a lot of what ifs. Is that one of these simple exercises, if I've got time, I'll talk about a more complex one. If not, I can send you an email. Is that one of the simple ways is just write out way before you go to bed. I would suggest, at the end of the working day or early evening, is to write out what are your inner fearful child's what ifs. And sometimes you might be surprised about what he or she is anxious about. Is that, they might be about, actually the real problems, but it might be bigger things. It might be things that are never going to happen. But for the fearful child, that's what's going on. And those are the things that either stopping you from going to sleep, or when you wake up at 3 o'clock, even if you're not actually actively worrying about it, is your brain isn't able to really relax and go back to sleep, because subconsciously it will know that there's this 101 issues. So writing down what the brain's what ifs are, say that again, writing down what the fearful child's what ifs are. And then I take up a different color pen. I write these things down in a different color. I write down what my inner wisdom says to reassure the fearful child. And I write in gold. And so my inner wisdom, can be reassuring, can be comforting, can say, well, actually, if that happens, or you could, let's do X, that will help you to reassure you about that. And certainly over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been doing this exercise almost on a daily basis, because there's so much going on, running a business as well. I've got my client work. That's fine. That's been a pleasure. But to deal with all of those fears and anxiety about not just about my mum, then the impact on my brother, and there's loads of other, and so I really would kind of recommend about doing this kind of exercise. So I'm going to talk through in a moment that about a more kind of complex way of doing this. But what I'd like you to share is any of your fearful child's what ifs. I won't call out your name. You can either directly message me, but what are some of your fearful child's what ifs? So what I've just described is a shortcut. So somebody's just said, so recent focus on my son in his early 20s staying safe in London after moving from Ireland. I'm sure that does evoke a lot of what ifs, definitely. And also the challenges that's outside of your circle of influence. It's in your circle of concern. What's within your circle of influence is how you then have conversations with your son, and have those adult to adult, so that he can be as safe as possible in London. So as I was saying, this is a shortcut model. What I'd like to go on to is to look at a longer way. And so it's a model that draws on a model of how we communicate with each other called transactional analysis. And I'm not going to talk about, I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and I want to allow some time for questions afterwards. So feel free to be typing your questions when we get near to the end. Is that, so this is based on transactional analysis, normally used to look at transactions between people. And at some point, when I came across this model, which was about 35 years ago, as I got into it, I realized that it was happening within me, these conversations. And I created an exercise, and it's in the book, but I can also send you a handout on the exercise. And there are, what I do is I write down what all the different parts of myself are saying. So the inner critic is the critical controlling parent turned in on ourselves. And it usually shouts loudest and then drowns out all the other voices, including our wisdom as well. But it also brings about a lot of anxiety. So, but write it down, because otherwise it would just shout louder. And often it's quite shocking what the inner critic is saying. Is that then write down what your inner fearful child, all your fearful child's what ifs. Then, if you have an inner sulky child or rebellious child, write down what they are saying. I sometimes have my rebellious child is saying something. Most of the time, I don't have one. What is your fun child? Because that's all quite draining. Also, listen to your fun child. Often, as adults, our fun child doesn't really get a look in. Is that, we've just gone through, we're going through a pandemic. is that often the things that would bring fun and enjoyment we couldn't do. And certainly I brought things into, it might not be fun, but it really brings joy into my life, because I think it's also what brings joy. I got new things I do now that I didn't do before the pandemic. And then what your nurturing parent says, that knows what's best for you, and the wise adult self that can be calm and logical and has pearls of wisdom. And I recommend to clients do this at least once a week, and then on an ad hoc basis when they need to do it. And I can send some more information about this. What I'd like to do is, before we kind of go into action planning, I'd like to allow some time, at least kind of 5 minutes, for questions. So if you've got any questions, any comments about, so the whole kind of crux of this is that calming your mind and facing the issues during the day, focus on your circle of influence, focusing on what you can do. If there are, immovable feasts in your life, either in or outside of work, that are causing, that are challenges and causing, and you can't actually resolve them, like the situation with my mum, is that look at focusing on what can you do to really manage yourself so you can thrive despite what's going on. And which doesn't mean, there were certainly times last week that thriving was not on the agenda or was not happening. But I was then kept on taking action to help me to bring up, dampen down my threat response, talk to a good friend, etc., to actually help me to manage myself in the situation and therefore be able to sleep better. I think it's also really important that you don't beat yourself up for not sleeping. And one of the things that I learned, for many, well, actually, it was a couple of decades, I had chronic allergic rhinitis all year round, which would frequently disturb my sleep. And I learned to kind of lean in to it and relax, and not to get het up about not, only getting 4 hours sleep or whatever else it was. And so, and on Tuesday, I'm talking as I'm hoping, if anybody's got questions, please type as I talk. Is that on Tuesday, something very major happened with my mum and was very distressing. And that night I did fall asleep, and like my brother was on the ground. I don't live nearby, but I was dealing with things. We're trying to get care in. We're trying to do everything. And I was, and also trying to work. I did fall asleep very quickly, but I woke about 1 o'clock and I was wide awake. I'd had about, actually, because I'd gone to sleep really early, I'd had about, at that point, about 4 hours sleep. And I was just wide awake. And I kind of thought, you know what, it's okay. It's okay, because actually my brain is probably not going to go back to sleep because there's still ongoing issues. And I just relaxed, because if you get up and start doing things, you're not allowing your body to relax. So I relaxed, I got sort of different apps to, meditate, to calm down. I just read a nice book, and I relax my body and relax myself as much as possible. So I think that's a really important thing. So let's go to actions. So I always ask people in my courses about what are you going to do, keep doing that's working for you? What are you going to develop further? So it might be your ability to relax when you're not sleeping. It might be about actually developing your ability to manage your anxiety during the day, stay focused on your circle of influence. And what are you going to let go of? And one of the things that last week, I'm a Buddhist, and I was, I think it was either Tuesday or Wednesday evening, I was doing my evening practice and I was chanting, and I just thought I had to just lean into the chaos that is my life at the moment, because there's so much out of my circle of influence. And actually that I kind of went, yeah, okay. So that's kind of what you need to kind of let go of. So somebody said, agreeing with leaning into times when I'm not sleeping. Sometimes I read with my Kindle, doesn't disturb my husband, while I'll enjoy chilling out and relaxing, even though in bed. So I think, it's being able to do that. So somebody's saying, take up walking in the early mornings, set me up for the day. And if you can do it within 2 hours of waking, is that, and it's brisk walking, so it resets your clock. It really has had a profound impact, barring emergencies that are going on in my life. Somebody else saying, need to work better at my anxiety during the day and to try to be present in the now and not fall into catastrophic thinking. So with that is that use the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise that will really bring you into the here and now. But also is that do the listening to your whole self exercise that I was talking about. I would say do that on a weekly basis. And then maybe it might be, is listen to that inner fearful child and her what ifs that is going, whoa, everything's going to go wrong, to help you to change that catastrophic thinking. So love the early morning walk and seeing the seasonal changes. Yeah, it is lovely. Really, really good. So I talked about this earlier on, is there are lots of free things. If you're not already, I know a lot of people on the call, but some people are. If you're not already registered with my website, you'll get Melanie's Monday motivation messages, the Inspire Coaching newsletter, and also news my free webinars. I have a free coaching audit, which is also under the free resources. But it's free resources and shop. So also there's also about my being and doing course that is £99, including tax, like VAT in this country, and the being and doing the manager's transformation process that starts on the 2nd of November with live action group sessions. Whereas the being and doing 8-week courses, you get 2 videos every Monday morning. And you get worksheets, and there's a different theme each week. And then you get wonderful Wednesday input, and you get fantastic Friday input as well. So thank you so much for coming along. And it's really been great to have you. And I'm going to stop the recording now and just thank you for coming.